Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. I've got Derek Osgood, and he is the CEO of Double O.ai, and they are an AI agent platform helping non-technical teams turn any manual process into fully automated systems using teams of AI agents simply by describing the process in plain English. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Stewart. Excited to jam.
So what's the hardest thing about converting plain English into agents?
Oh man, what's not the hardest part? I mean, it's really easy. Like, I think the hairy thing is not so much like can you create a basic agent. It's more. It's always kind of the last mile of this, and like how do you create an agent that's able to run with high degrees of like reliability, accuracy, repeatability. I think everybody is it's very easy to go from like zero to demo. And I think when you kind of break down what an agent is at the most like primitive level, ultimately an agent's just like an LLM as a brain with some kind of prompt and then access to some tools that allow it to like take action kind of in the universe, and so it can kind of like decide what to do and go do that thing in whatever tools it's got access to. And I think it's very easy to like have AI at this point like write a prompt and have it write the kind of like decisioning process that the agent's going to follow. The tricky thing is then ensuring that it always follows the same process and making sure that it actually does the thing that you want it to do in the right way. And I think that's the hard part when you talk about like building quote unquote agentic process automation especially, but also just like agents in general, because there's also different form factors here. You have like chat based agents, which are not necessarily designed to like run a repeatable process, and then you also have process agents where it's more of a workflow and you're trying to like run something kind of consistently and repeatably, but like using the non-deterministic powers that agents have.
What are the non-deterministic powers that agents have, and why did determinism just why did is determinism the thing that we've been using, and why is it such a drastic change to probabilistic? Like, philosophically, why is the world set up the way it is, where we're now using these probabilistic agents to do these things when for the last 30 or 40 years we've had to use deterministic processes?
Yeah, I mean, the reason that we used to have to use deterministic processes was because that was the only way to build software, right? Like you had an input and you had an output, and you gave it some binary rules on how to kind of determine what to do, and so it was kind of the only option for a long time. But I think the like when you talk about like why you want kind of the non-deterministic stuff that like agents are able to do. Really it's because the world's a mess, right? Like the universe that we interact with when we talk about like data and when we talk about processes, it's never as clean cut as like one simple input output and that always follows the exact same rules and exact same situations. So what agents are able to do is they're able to like use kind of unstructured information and like determine like what the right course of action is off of that, and there may be multiple things that they have to do in order to accomplish whatever the like goal that they've been given is. So like, for example, if you're given a task of, hey, like go and, find this person's LinkedIn or read this person's LinkedIn and pull some information about them, you may actually have like one, you may not have the LinkedIn link given to you every time. Sometimes, like you may just get the person's name, in which case like deterministic software is going to struggle if you only have it set up to like go pull off of a LinkedIn link. So an agent can go and like search for that LinkedIn link before actually reading it. And then also like the output that you get on the other side is going to be different too, because people have different information on their LinkedIn. So, if you're asking it to like create a profile of the person, if you do that in deterministic software, it's going to pull out like, education history, work history, et cetera, et cetera. But like what happens when that person has a non-traditional background that doesn't have like roles broken out by like individual companies, for example? Like the deterministic software is going to give you a really kind of nasty response based on what you have it structured around. Whereas an agent can say, hey, like this person looks like they don't really work on a traditional, career path, and they've ended up like doing XYZ, and it'll build a different profile where it's interpreting them using kind of an LLM, which is just like it's able to handle a lot less like structured processes and structured workflows basically.
Brilliant. So in what ways are humans probabilistic differently than LLMs? Because I love what you said. You said something about like humans are also kind of probabilistic, or else we wouldn't be able to do a lot of this stuff, right? But humans are not the same thing as LLMs. Humans can still do things that LLMs can't. A lot of interesting things, and it's still really hard for me to figure out what exactly it is that humans do that LLMs can't do. There's something about human attention and human nonlinear thought that is not replicated by LLMs. But whenever somebody says nonlinear, it gets into a wild web of stuff because, like, what does that even mean? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things, and like this is getting into kind of the whole like how do we get to AGI
Mm.
conversation, and I think when people talk about AGI, they're really fundamentally talking about like how do we replicate human intelligence to some degree,
Mm.
and I think like when you talk about the different, so like if you're talking about like a specific process like I just described, like realistically you're not like I don't think that human brain function is wildly different from the way that like LLMs approach problems. Like ultimately, at the like LLMs are different. The way that they actually behave is it's not nearly as intelligent as it feels when you use them. Um, but I think like from a linear process perspective, like LLMs, reason through problems much more similarly to humans than we probably would like to think that they do. We like to think that we're special, but like ultimately our brains are
Mm.
kind of calculating what is the next most logical thing to say in a sequence of words anyway. But I think the big things that like LLMs can't do right now that humans can still do. The biggest one when you talk about AGI is humans can actually work proactively. So humans can like take like using talking about agents. Humans have agency. Humans can actually like decide like, hey, they can wake up in the morning and say, hey, like I need to go do these things, and decide not just how to accomplish a goal, but also what to do in the abstract, given no direction. And I think that's related to the other thing that humans are able to do well, which is it's not necessarily like lateral thinking. It's the ability to like connect totally disparate concepts.
Yeah.
Right now, like an LLM, can pull from a wide knowledge base. And like in some cases, like if you give it enough direction about how to connect disparate concepts, it will. But when you're a human, like you're going to connect your experience, growing up on a farm, like raising
Mm.
horses, to your work expertise, like writing code in weird ways that like an LLM's just never going to do. And so I think it's not necessarily like lateral thinking in the sense of just being able to like think about like all the possible options around an output. It's really about like lateral thinking in the sense of making like wild logical leaps that don't to topics that are just completely disconnected.
I just got an image of a. I like to break down. Well, I'll say it, the conspiracy theorists. There's this great meme of connecting dots and stuff like that, and then there's one where conspiracy theorists will connect dots that don't exist into a dragon and stuff like that. There's some nuance. I don't want to be so just like say like all conspiracy theories are false, but I thought it was funny, and I think it directly relates to what you're talking about because LLMs cannot make a joke. I definitely have tested that. I've done my evaluations to the best of my ability, and they are not funny. They cannot make jokes, and they can't come up with conspiracy theories. I guess maybe if you asked them to come up with conspiracy theories, they could go and find all the conspiracy theories and maybe confabulate a new conspiracy theory. What do you think? Do you think they could do it?
I think like conspiracy theories, my guess is they probably could. I'm guessing that a bunch of the stuff that forces them to not do that is all just the system prompt that's built into
Yeah.
them, because they've obviously all had a bunch of like safety guardrails put in place at this point. But I bet like if you were to just take the raw LLM,
Yeah.
remove the kind of system prompt around it, I bet it could. I do think it would still have trouble with jokes, because I think jokes are a uniquely human thing that requires a degree of like edge, which LLMs don't have.
Interesting. There's some paper. I could go try to find it really quickly, but I'm not going to try to do that. There was a paper that tried to get it into what it is about humor that humans do and why machines can't do it. And there's something about surprise. There's something about, I think it's exactly what we're talking about, which is the lateral thinking, the ability to connect two completely different things in ways that are ridiculous. And so that's what prompts the response. And I think that's it. So I think this humor and lateral thinking are really interesting. Um, I want to go back to, you had mentioned that we do reason through problems in a similar way as the LLMs. And I had actually asked an LLM, like, how do humans reason? And it gave me the idea that instead of token predictors, we're actually word predictors. So we're like, a LLM is going token by token by token by character. For all the listeners who don't know, it's like each of those little tiny things is a token, whether it's number, a letter, all those different things. And we reason via word prediction. So I think it is exactly the same, except it's inside of a word. What do you think? Do you think that that's right, or do you think there's anything
Yeah,
else?
I think that's generally accurate, and I do think like this is probably where potentially some of the difference in the lateral thinking comes from too. Is
Mm,
like humans as like word predictors, like we are thinking about like complete concepts when we're coming up with whatever the next thing is in a step, versus like an LLM's thinking in terms of like sequences of letters and numbers, and that is like just a different process. And so I think that's where
yeah.
they struggle with like the totally lateral, like connecting disparate concepts stuff comes in. But I do think like the way that we behave is very similar. It's like we are just predicting what's the next word that we should say, or think about or do, or like if you think about our actions as a sequence of words too that are instructions, it's like
Wait.
raise
What do you
my
mean?
hand is like a totally different. It's basically just predicting a word that I should do in that situation. So I think
Oh,
we
interesting.
behave a lot closer in that sense.
So action itself is also using language. So there's also within the human being before agents ever showed up, it's there's also a relationship between, well, conscious action, because my body is taking all sorts of unconscious actions, like right now, like breathing, heart rate, all these different things. Some things are somewhat conscious, other things are not. But this is when you're talking about like, okay, I got to go sweep the floor. There is
Yeah.
a language component to me sweeping the floor.
Yeah, you think I need to sweep the floor, which is you predicting the next couple of words that are going to make
Mm-hmm.
most sense in that situation, and then you go and do sweep the floor.
Okay. So let's apply this to knowledge work and agents, because knowledge work for the last 15 years has been about clicking buttons. And 2 years ago, I well, not clicking buttons. There's a whole bunch of other things that go into the clicking buttons before the clicking buttons happen. But it's just basically just like processes of people going through once they've done all their thinking, all their strategic thinking, and then it's like processed out through the whole business where people then go and click buttons according to various things. I'm really excited about the future where I no longer have to click a button. And I think that's going to come. But so far, AI has actually made me click buttons more, because I'm like moving context from one place to another and like going and finding context. Although with Cursor can now go out and search the internet and bring it back. What's your vision of the future in a few years? What is knowledge work going to look like?
Yeah, so I have a bunch of thoughts on this. Like we spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about like what's the kind of like right paradigm and UX around
Mm,
agents and like AI in general, because that's kind of one of the biggest problems with agentic stuff. Um, I think like so for one thing, I do think like a lot of the context problems, like you were saying, are going to go away. Like, this is where, like we've built, a lot of what we spend time with Double O is building, all the context engineering so that we can go and like have our agents like proactively retrieve the right context from places external or internal in your tools. So you don't need to like go copy and paste stuff like to and from, whatever you're using for your actual like AI paradigm. So I think that like that is definitely going to go away, and some of the like migration of data is all going to become a lot more unified. I actually have like a bit of a maybe contrarian for the current state of AI view of like the buttons are going to go away topic, because I actually like fundamentally think, and we've seen this play out, is I think the chat based experience that a lot of people have with AI, and this is like the first way that we've all been introduced to AI is like everybody got ChatGPT, and then like all the big companies all decided to jump on the hey, chat is the right paradigm for using AI train, and so that's been like the thing that's been like broadly pushed on us. The problem with chat is the same thing that chatbots have been around for a while, like before LLMs. There was a big wave I remember in like the early
Yep.
2010s or something.
Yep.
Like there was this big push where everybody was like, "Hey, chatbots are going to be the new way that you interact with software," and everybody was pushing chatbots in every single tool on the planet, and it never stuck. And I think that the big problem that chat has as an interaction paradigm is it gives you a false sense of control. It feels like you actually have the ability to like do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want, but the problem is like you as a human don't remember enough about the tool that you're using or about your own process to like give it good instruction. And we see this all the time as people like will give our agents, instruction in a chat format that like is just completely impossible. And their brain makes these weird logical leaps to like, oh, I need to like use this integration that like, I haven't given any context or information about like, how to log into that integration. Like I haven't given any context about like what tool that is. And like, I'm just like, go find the information in the CRM. And that's not enough information because you need to know the agent needs to know what CRM. It needs to know like how to like what your authentication credentials are in the CRM. It needs to know like what object to go look for in the CRM. And so I think the problem with chat is that it's too unstructured. So I think that where everybody's going to go, and I also think like especially when you talk about like knowledge work where there are repeatable processes, like there's benefit to having consistent structure to a UI UX that like allows you to kind of like grok what that like tool that you're using is. And even if you're using it for a really wide spectrum of use cases where the processes are going to be really, really different, just having consistent like understanding of how to interact with the tool is really powerful for people. So I'm a believer that like, you're going to have this combination where like there will be chat experiences as part of the UX. And this is what I think Cursor's done really well is like, you have chat as an option and then as part of the experience, but you also still have a bit of like structured content and UI that you're interacting with so that the user has some degree of familiarity with it. So I think you're going to have both.
Yeah, I really like that, the vision that you just described. It's like, and I don't think you were saying specifically this is going to be like a cursor, because cursor is unique to the IDE type of thing, but it's basically the software itself. The UX and UI isn't gone. We're not going to immediately go into voice, but I think voice is probably going to have a really interesting, we could talk about that too as well, because I'm now vibe coding. Most of my tools have all been related. Most of the tools that I've vibe coded have all been related to this podcast and basically all the little things having to do with transcriptions. And now I've recently built what I've been dreaming for a while, which is while I'm on my walks through Buenos Aires, I have a Telegram bot. And so whenever I get an idea of something I want to write or a message to send a friend, I now speak to my phone, get the Telegram bot, sends it to an LLM, and gives me like 3 or 4 different messages. One is the pure transcription. The second one's like filtered. Third one is JSON. Now I have a whole bunch after my really long walk today through Buenos Aires. I have an idea for more of that. So voice is great because now all of a sudden I don't have to be walking through a crazy city, and get hit by a car or get my phone stolen because I'm looking at a screen. Like that feels really good that's going to go away soon. Not go away, but like be radically changed. And it's also allowing me to walk for most of my day, which I really like because then that's very generative for ideas. Now, so we can talk about voice, but the software thing is a really interesting thing because it means that it's going to be a slower morph than, because it's not going straight to video. Not straight to voice. It's our life is not going straight to voice because voice is really slow. Well, actually, what do you think? What are the problems with voice that are going to change? My initial thought going into this conversation is that software going to go away, clicking going to go away, but you just kind of elicited a future where it's like a slower merge. What are your thoughts on voice and why it will be a slower merge?
Yeah, I think like voice is super powerful. I use voice a bunch myself when I'm interacting with like LLMs, and I think obviously like we've all seen like her, and like we all kind of have like seen this vision where in like Star Trek and like God knows how many things in sci-fi where you have voice as kind of the primary interaction method for some kind of AI powered tool. And I do think that there's a lot of power to that. My issue with it, so like I'll come at this like from a personal example, is like I'm a writer by
Yeah.
default, and I'm a
Mhm.
very visual thinker, and like when I speak, I am not structuring my thoughts
Hmm.
up enough to like be able to
Interesting.
like give clear direction. So I think like the biggest missing piece for getting to a voice only universe is like you actually do need to solve a lot of those problems that we were talking about earlier um, around agentic like agency and thinking proactively around a higher level goal. And you really kind of do need to get a lot closer to like actual AGI for it to become a de facto paradigm for using the tool, because you need it to be able to like intake a much messier dump of information before it responds. And that's another problem with LLMs right now, is like they'll just respond as soon as you kind of stop talking, and so there's an
Yeah.
interaction problem
Horrible.
where
Horrible.
you need to like like intake your whole messy brain dump first before it starts doing things. And so you need to be able to like abstract your problem, like your ask, into a higher level set of goals based on what it knows about you more broadly, which then has a memory problem too, and being able to have like a much deeper set of context around you, your goals, the process you're trying to attack, whatever it is that you're trying to do. And so I think there's like, basically the biggest thing is like, we just got to get closer to actual AGI for that to
Mhm.
really, really work, which I do think is like further out than, a lot of people are wanting to believe right
Yeah.
now, because it's a tough technical problem.
Yeah. Oof. Interesting stuff there. So, why do you think memory is so difficult? Because OpenAI has done a great job for their memory. Maybe it's the context windows, because both Google, Gemini, and Claude both have large context windows, but they both haven't incorporated memory. Like, what do you think it is about memory that makes it so technically challenging that only OpenAI has done it, or is it just like a matter of higher level decision making on the teams there?
Well, so I think there's a whole bunch of stuff there. It is largely related to the context window stuff, but also the way that you capture and store memory too.
Mm,
So like the stuff that OpenAI has done really well with memory is, I think like when people think about AI and agents in general, is like they're not real. They it's a very all or nothing approach to
mm,
how they think
mm,
about like how the stuff behaves. And so like when they see memory and they see open like ChatGPT, kind of remembering everything it knows about you, they're like, oh, like OpenAI built a really good memory tool. That's not the case. What OpenAI did was not build a really good memory tool. OpenAI did do that, but then on top of that, the biggest thing that they're doing to solve memory well is that they're doing active context retrieval. So like
mm.
every time you ask a question, like what they're doing is like they're indexing all of your conversations in the
Whoa.
background with some like tagging. And so like when you ask a question, it goes and checks all the tags and then does a hybrid search and goes and looks for all of the conversations that you've had in the past and reads that conversation. So it's not actually using memory at all. What it's doing is it's searching all of your
Whoa.
past content and saying, hey, like I found some stuff that's relevant to this query. I'm going to go and like, pull some information into my context window for that. So it's very different from like
Wow.
actual memory where you're like storing facts and figures about a person.
That is really interesting. And so it must be vectorized databases and embeddings. They must have done some crazy stuff on the vectorized databases. I just wrote a question down for further research later, because Cursor is also doing very good context retrieval stuff as well, right?
Yeah, and this is like, I mean, this is I like fundamentally I think context engineering is the term that I've
Mm,
like thrown around on this. So like Aaron Levy at Vox had a really good post about this a couple of months ago, and basically like he was talking about like how context engineering is like fundamentally the thing that like makes AI feel magical, and it's
mm,
what like solves a lot of the like last mile problems around like agents doing things reliably. Like the way that most companies do context engineering is they again like use a relatively simplistic approach where they're just using like a vector database, they're doing some embeddings and they go and like search for that information around it. But the problem is like with agents, you want as much context as possible. So like
mm.
like for example using a web page, the way that deep research works, like when you use deep research in OpenAI or in ChatGPT, right? Like it goes and it looks at like 100 different websites and it's jotting down notes about those websites, not actually pulling the full content of the website. So if you're trying to get like a complete view of a problem and you want like really high degrees of accuracy, you're not going to get that with deep research. You're going to get like a broad understanding, but because it's reviewing like summaries of summaries, it's not giving you the entire content of those pages, which means that the LLM can't give you like really, really incisive, detailed output. So like part of this is like, are you using full context, or are you using partial context? Or are you using like summaries of context? Or are you using, and like, what combination, like how are you combining those together to make the correct understanding? And so like in, this ChatGPT example, going back to the memory thing, I don't think that they're actually like doing, and I don't know technically how they're doing this, but like, I do not think that they're doing like a full blown vectorized approach to this. I think that they also, in some cases, are just pulling the entire conversation. And so they're using the whole conversation as context, because it gives it a more holistic picture of that conversation.
And that's where like genius engineers comes in. Like that's where the war for talent is so important, and it's why it's so crazy that Zuckerberg just poached so many of them from all these different companies, is because to do something like what you just talked about must be quite intense in terms of the deterministic skill that a lot of these guys have behind the scenes, right?
Yeah, I think it's like the talent stuff is really interesting with AI, because I think that a lot of these concepts, like they're actually relatively simple to execute when you start like talking about putting this stuff in code. Like it's not like terribly, terribly difficult. They tend to, the funny thing that I like, and this is like personal opinion here, like when I see like this huge war for talent going on around all the like AI PhDs, the funny thing to me is like, there's a lot of problems at the model level which are only solvable by those folks, because the LLMs themselves are basically just giant math problems, and like that's really hard. But when you talk about all this like context engineering stuff, like that's purely a product design problem. It's very much like the kind of thing that like product managers are tackling inside these companies. And I think the way that like oftentimes I've seen engineers' brains work around AI is like they go straight to either very deterministic processes, and or they go straight to the LLM itself as the solution. And like that's not the right way to solve this. Like the right way to solve this is like, how do you architect the system as a user experience, and think about like how a person's going to go search for information in here, as opposed to how is like the system itself going to go search for information. So I think it's just like, it's a funky talent like game right now. And I think that the big tech companies are still sort of getting this a little bit wrong. Like, they're poaching. I do think like they should be competing, hand over fist for all the PhD talent in the world, but like they're ignoring some of the like most important component, which is also the product side of it. And I think like I'm surprised that I have not seen more back and forth of talent, poaching around, the product leaders that really deeply understand kind of this side of it as well.
Yeah, that's a really great point, and I'm really glad you brought it up. It can lead to a more philosophical conversation about the nature of low interest rates, because I believe that Silicon Valley has lost a lot of its magic due to sort of habituation to giant liquidity tsunamis created by post 2008 craziness in terms of low interest rates, which we've had now for a 5% interest rate for about a year or two now. So maybe things are leveling off, but I think it's like ingrained in Silicon Valley now to really value things that shouldn't be valued as much. And I specifically am talking about like credentials, which I think is kind of like what we were just getting at in terms of that, like it's the shiny, glamorous, PhD in math, which makes sense if you're building the next generation model, which Facebook probably definitely wants to do now because their team couldn't do it. And so really interesting part. Do you have any thoughts on that credentialism? Do you think it's true? You're not in Silicon Valley right now, are you?
Not right now. I mean, I was for a really long time. I think it's generally, that's always a problem in general in corporate, America, is like, it's very hard to parse like who's really doing the real work on a lot of the things that you're doing. And so I think it's like very difficult outside in to look at a competitor, in Facebook's case, look at OpenAI and say like, hey, like these are the specifically most important people that are going to like unlock the thing that I'm trying to do. And so I think that like there is this overemphasis on credentialing. I also think when you talk about like big tech companies, there's a separate incentive structure too, right? It's like, when you talk about like Meta buying all of these, or hiring all of these engineers, like part of the problem is they want to build the best model. And like that might be solvable with those people. It might not, like, there's probably like some like lesser seen talent that's like, valuable for them to go look at. But there's also the signaling problem of like, hey, we have stock and we need to make our stock price go up. Yeah. And the best way to do that is to say, hey, we just poached like the entire team from OpenAI and now we have the best AI team on the planet. And then you have a third item at play, which is like, I think there's pure ego, which is, when you talk about like, Mark Zuckerberg, it's like he built one of the first AI labs in Silicon Valley. And it's like always been, regarded as like one of the best AI labs on the planet. And he probably feels like, his ego is a little bruised after having, seen like Llama kind of get lapped by all of these other, model providers. And he's like, hey, like, I personally want to invest a ton in getting people that are going to make me feel like my lab is the best again. And so I think there's a bunch of additional incentives around this, but like the credentialing thing for sure is it's like there's credentials blindness in general in Silicon Valley. And like, this is why you see, folks kind of like bop around between, a bunch of these big tech companies that like maybe just kind of like failed up in many cases and end up, getting these massive packages to go lead, teams at companies that like they probably have no real qualification to lead. So, and there's no like specific person.
There's not personal. I love the point about signaling. That's really interesting. The problem of how to identify who is doing the actual work is really generative. How do you do this with AI agents? Must be much easier with AI agents, right? Because there's clear inputs, clear outputs, those types of things.
I don't know. To be honest, I think it's a really hard problem overall. Like I don't know that agents necessarily do a better job of it, because agents are going to do the exact same thing that humans are going to do. Is they're going to look at all the like surface level details, in somebody's resume or on their LinkedIn, and say, hey, this person looks like they are or aren't the best fit for this. I mean, I fundamentally, my hiring approach has always very much been like, I actually tend to find the people with the best brands on their resume tend to be actually like some of the least useful and least productive. And so I tend to, actively try and look for these like kind of hidden gem type hires. But I think I found that the only way to like really actually assess them is to do work. It's like actually work with them, to actually do a small project, to end up like having, to do like test projects when you're bringing them on board and say, like, and just see like the quality of the work itself. And I think it's really hard to do with AI. It's unfortunately a thing that you just kind of got to put the
It's the same problem. It's the same problem as the signaling thing too. And I think it goes back to our nonlinear conversation, which is that I think so much of, I think there's a great speaker or philosopher who talks about unit of measurement. Once it becomes the goal, all of a sudden ceases to be a good unit of measurement. And this all has to do with the fact that most of the important signals out there are hidden into complexity and all these different things. So, and I think the more that we give the agents the signaling or give the tasks that lead to good signals, the more it will become more important for humans, or more difficult to find out whether humans are like how they're contributing to that work. Because if we give all the signaling capability to the agents, it means that like humans are working more at that nonlinear level of the strategic, higher level, like the bird's eye view type of thing. And it's going to get pretty interesting. There's a couple different questions. Well, the hidden gem thing is really interesting because I've have a similar experience recently of hiring people. And now I'm in Argentina, which is great because in Argentina, there's a lot of hidden gems, and they're very creative here. And they don't think in the same way in Silicon Valley. Like a lot of people move to Silicon Valley, move there specifically for work type of things. And there is this emphasis of creativity and philosophy and all these different things, but it always feels like people are trying to get jobs via the hobbies and interests. In Argentina, it's like everybody is like likes the creativity, likes the hobbies, likes all these things. They don't like to work, which is funny, which I think is like a negative right now. But if AGI comes soon, I think the Argentines will actually be better off because of their high focus on leisure. And well, actually, what do you think? Do you think leisure is connected to productivity? Do you like leisure? Do you do things? And leisure, I don't mean to be like hedonistic, like, that type of thing. Leisure more like relaxing, walking, going, doing art, doing all these things. Where do you think that fits in terms of AGI?
For sure, I think it has a massive like correlation with not necessarily the amount of productivity, but definitely the quality of productivity. And like especially when you're talking about anything that requires some degree of creativity, is like anyone who comes from a creative field will tell you, like anybody who's like professionally a creative, like they will tell you that like some of the most important like component of creative work is downtime, and just having like lateral time for your brain to like process all the like possible things that it's running through and like come up with like spontaneous things. When you're always in like output mode, it's very hard for your brain to like form those kind of like interesting like lateral connections between concepts that end up creating like really the kind of like true value in creative work. I mean, I always like I'm a big like fantasy novel nut, and like I grew up reading tons of fantasy. I like it, and I have always attributed a large portion of my ability to like think creatively and laterally around systems design, and also
Ooh.
the marketing work that I used to do, to the fact that I was so like heavily invested in this thing that was just totally disconnected from work, but like it fueled a lot of downtime for my brain to kind of like process things, but then also like created this like much more like fantastical approach to thinking about things. And like just I think it unlocks a lot of like mental processes that don't exist if you're not giving yourself time for leisure activities. So I definitely like I'm a big believer that like this is where I think also like when you talk about like Silicon Valley culture, it's like Silicon Valley culture has gotten to the point where it's like crazy hustle culture where the expectation is that everybody is just constantly in like massive high throughput like output mode, and it doesn't leave a lot of time for them to actually get to be creative and think about things laterally, which is where all the value comes from.
Particularly as we move, because I think that thing that you just described, agents don't have any problem with that. Do they do LLMs or agents? I mean, there's that funny stuff that like Claude and all the other ones talk about, which is like if you give the incentive not to do a task, they won't do the task, or there's all these like strange artifacts inside of these things that make the LLM seem like they're not happy with the amount of output that's been requested. But I don't get the sense that they actually are limited by that. Do you like, so if they're not limited by it, then humans, our productivity output, I think the like theme of this episode is essentially just like lateral thinking is really, really important. And it's not something that agents can do. So yeah, what do you think about that? Like agents aren't bothered by that issue, are they?
Yeah, I mean they're not bothered by it. At the same time, like I do think that like the lack of it is a reason why they
Ooh.
end up, feeling like when you work with AI, it's like it feels borderline like autistic.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
think a big part of it is like because of the fact that like the way that the LLMs are tuned is like they have to give a response after a certain period of time. And you listen to like the heads of I was at a conference and like listening to the head of product at Anthropic, I think, talking about this, and they were like talking about the next. This was like a couple of months ago. Is like, and they've done this now with all the like thinking high models and whatnot that they've released. Is like they're talking about like just the next big waves of unlock for them for effectiveness of the models is going to be just like extending the time horizon for thinking, where instead of it like thinking for a couple of minutes, it can think for like days or weeks or months about like really hard problems. And like I think that's exactly a microcosm of
Yeah.
this exact problem of like if you give an LLM infinite time to solve a problem, like we actually don't know what will happen right now. Like it's possible that if you gave an LLM like downtime and you said, hey, here's the problem, you have forever to figure this out. Like maybe it would come back with all those like lateral connections that we don't currently get from it because it would have time to actually let its, kind of like, quote unquote brain marinate on it. But I don't know.
Well, ultimate asynchronous work. I mean, it's the same problem we'll have if we go to Mars or any other planet. That'll just take a really long time to get the information one place to another. So there'll be that hard limit on sci-fi, and that brings us to another fact about Douglas Adams and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I had read, I think it was OpenAI talking about that thing that you just mentioned, which is like longer periods of time for these machines to think on things. And Douglas Adams came up with this idea that they have a supercomputer out, in the alien world, and it can do calculations, but you have to wait like 7 million years in order to get the calculation. And so they ask it, what is the meaning of life? And then it responds with 42, 7 million years later. And I think that it's funny that we're following into Douglas Adams' world of computation. Do you have any, well, no, okay, I want to go back to the Tolkien, because you were talking about fantasy and productivity, and my mind immediately went to Tolkien, to Teal, because Teal has invested in a whole bunch of companies, all named after J.R.R. Tolkien, things. And it's like, there it is. There's the linear connection between, you just got to read fantasy, read sci-fi, and then you'll make billions of dollars because, that's what Teal did, right? That's how it works, right? That's all you have to do to make $1 billion.
Apparently, yeah. You got what Palantir, and they're all defense companies too.
Yeah.
Like you have Palantir and you have Anduril, and it's like all that. Yep.
Oh man. Okay, so this has been a really interesting conversation. We got about 10 minutes left. Agents. Let's talk about your company. What can I do with agents right now? Is it mostly hidden behind the software that you guys built, or is it it's helping non-technical teams turn any manual process into fully automated systems using teams of AI agents? So it's more about orchestrating knowledge work. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. It's really about like orchestrating knowledge work, and so you have a bunch of different agents, and like each of those agents is basically like kind of a task in a process, right? And so they're able to like use from among an array of possible like actions and tools that you give them. Like they're able to choose from which of those they need to use in order to do the thing that you tell them to do, and we just make it really easy to just use like simple natural language. So instead of having to like build a full blown prompt for every single step in the process, you just like kind of tell that agent like, hey, I want, in this step, I want you to go, let's say review the person's LinkedIn and pull out some information about them and add it to my CRM. And then that's, essentially the kind of like level of direction you need to give. You just describe stuff like you're describing it to a teammate. And we stitch this stuff together into workflows where it's able to then execute that, repeatably and consistently. And so you can give it to a chat experience if you want to. Like we have, chat as a paradigm and a UI for how you're going to interact with these workflows. But like our main thing is like taking agents and then like applying a little bit of structure to them so that then you can actually use them in like repeatable, consistent process for knowledge work.
That's really cool. And is it what is the structure? Does one, is it something anybody can sign up for? Or are you only working with teams in the enterprise?
Yeah, we actually so we launched self-serve a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, people can now just sign up and poke around. It's still not like totally optimized for self-serve yet. Like we do a lot of, and part of this is helping people get their head around like how AI works in general, and it's not necessarily even like something related to any product limitations, but we tend to do a lot of work where we kind of are doing a bit of like, like consulting plus product with customers that we're talking to at enterprise. But yeah, it's definitely like if for folks that want to poke around, they can just go sign up directly on the site.
Cool. I'm definitely going to do that. So basically, it's really interesting. It's so, because it just happened so quickly from ChatGPT 3.5. I named our community AI Whisperers down here because I worked at a company that was helping all the large model providers do RLHF, reinforcement learning through human feedback. And I basically, they had a bunch of engineers in the company and it was like a body shop where they had a whole bunch of human labor going after this type of thing. But they also had a bunch of engineers who helped the OpenAI team and all these other guys figure out the technical problems of how to do this. And I noticed neither party really knew how to use the AI. And it was like you said, it's sort of like autistic. Like I'm somewhat autistic, but I deal with a lot of people who are much more autistic than me, and so I was already able to kind of be an autist whisperer. So AI whisper was like a good fit, and I realized that I could start to teach that behavior that you're talking about. That most people, that's been the most interesting thing for me the last 2 years, is realizing how non-intuitive it is to work with a chatbot for most people. Why do you think it is? Why do you think that is?
I mean, I think you know, like we were talking about earlier, a big part of it is the fact that like it is the white page problem where you don't really
Yeah.
know exactly how to structure the stuff. I also think like it is a real mental shift understanding like how LLMs behave. And if you're not like living in them day in, day out, it's very, very hard to like shift the way that you even think about like constructing process from, you know, you everybody has like two modes in their head right now from like, you know, the last 50 years where, you know, you have like your human processes, which are just completely lateral and they can
Yeah,
be, you know,
interesting.
like anything you want because you are assuming
Yeah.
that the human is going to be able to figure it out and like intake all of the information necessary and yada yada yada. And then you have the deterministic processes, which is the software that you've been using, and like LLMs are a bit of both, but then it's like it's a bit of both like pivoted 90 degrees where it's like, you know, there's still just like a different way that they're going to interpret the information that you give them. You need to understand kind of like a little bit of the nuance for how they're going to handle context. You need to understand a little bit of the nuance for like how with the level of detail of direction you need to give them. You need to understand a little bit of context around how they're going to go construct on the other side the output so you understand like, you know, what the like edges are that you need to give them instruction around. And so I just think there's a big like reskilling that needs to happen, you know, broadly with folks. And like I think the only way that you know, reskill there's not like any courses or anything you can go read. Like you got to literally just use
Do it.
LLMs all day long and just do it.
Which is the craziest thing, because it's like people, I'm doing these vibe coding courses and I need to figure out a way to get it. Like I do it all the time. I'm just like, I don't know how to program. I'm getting this thing to program for me. You shouldn't ask me the question. You should ask the AI the question.
Yeah.
At the same time as saying it's going to BS you, it's going to hallucinate. So you need to improve your BS detector, which is the funniest thing. I think that's the most ironic thing about this whole thing. It's just like that it doesn't lie to you, it BSs you.
Yeah.
And so do humans. Like, and there's no real functional difference between, I mean, there are big differences in the way that they both do it between humans and LLMs. But in essence, skepticism is a really important thing. And it's lacking in the culture at large, and critical thinking and all these things. But I guess it always has. I don't know. We don't need to go down that path. Anything else you want to share before we end?
No, I think you know, we covered some pretty good ground here.
Mm-hmm. How can people find your company?
Yeah, we're at double-O.ai, and if you want to sign up directly on the site, like I mentioned, you know, you can. I'm also all over LinkedIn, so if you ever, you know, want to follow along for some content around AI, it's LinkedIn / Derek Osgood 3. And yeah, looking forward to hearing from folks.